Good evening. My name is Lisa Barksdale, and I am a Senior Vice President with Bank of America. I also serve as a member of the Women's Leadership Series Steering Committee. Bank of America is committed to gender equality and has been recognized as a global leader in supporting the development and success of women in the workplace. At Bank of America, 50% of our workforce and 32% of our global management team are women. Our board of directors is 47% diverse. This includes 6 women directors, 2 African American directors, and 1 Hispanic director. We are one of only 5 S&P companies with 6 or more women on the board. My Bank of America colleagues and I are guided by a common purpose to help make financial lives better through the power of every connection. We deliver on this purpose through our commitment to responsible growth, which includes a focus on environmental, social, and governance leadership, or ESG. Our commitment to ESG has helped us respond to the rapid disruption caused first by the coronavirus and then by the very real consequences of systemic racism. Bank of America has committed to address racial inequality and equal opportunity with $1.25 billion in resources over a 5-year period. The recent attacks against Asian Americans have strengthened our resolve to fight for equality. At Bank of America, we will not tolerate hatred or racism of any kind, whether that takes the form of rhetoric against religion, discrimination as a result of gender identity, or violence because of the color of a person's skin or racial or ethnic background. In response to the recent violence, in Houston, we have committed over $150,000 to the Chinese Community Center, Asia Society Texas Center, and the Asian Chamber of Commerce. This funding will help these organizations continue efforts towards social equality and cultural understanding. It is Bank of America's distinct honor to be the title sponsor of Asia Society's flagship Women's Leadership Series. Asia Society has been at the forefront of raising awareness for women and celebrating their accomplishments. The Women's Leadership Series inspires, educates, and empowers, and it celebrates the diverse women who are making a significant impact both locally and globally. Before I introduce tonight's Women's Leadership Series and our distinguished speakers, we'd like to express our utmost gratitude to the title sponsor, Bank of America, and also our presenting sponsors, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, Ann and Albert Chow, and Nancy Polit-Jani. We also want to thank the many generous lead sponsors, additional supporters, and special friends advancing the mission of the series through their support and sponsorship. Special thanks to the Women's Leadership Series Chair, Ann Chow, and the steering committee members for their dedication, commitment, and inspiration in making it a successful series. Now, tonight's program highlights trailblazing women in space who have broken barriers, literally Earth barriers, since June 1963, when the first woman entered space almost 60 years ago. An increasing number of women have entered space exploration. Amazingly, half of the most recent class of NASA astronauts are women. However, space exploration requires not just astronauts and more, the women that are working behind the scenes to send astronauts into space, including scientists, engineers, and many others collaborating to the seemingly impossible task of sending people into space. To discuss some of these topics and inspire other women to boldly go break barriers on Earth and beyond, we're extremely honored to welcome Puja Gesrani, who is one of 29 NASA flight directors and the first female South Asian flight director appointed in this role. Puja is responsible for managing operations for all human spaceflight programs, including the current International Space Station. Puja began her NASA career in 2007 as a member of the flight control team, as well as an instructor to astronauts. Jasmine Mobelli was selected by NASA to join the 2017 astronaut candidate class, and having completed the initial training, is now eligible for a mission assignment. Jasmine is an AH-1W Super Cobra pilot and Marine Corps test pilot, and has over 150 combat missions and 2,000 hours of flight times in over 25 different aircraft. Grace Tan Wang is a principal systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, spending the first half of her 30-plus years in flight systems and the second half in mission operations. She has worked primarily on in-house projects such as Cassini, Spirit and Opportunity, Curiosity, and now Perseverance as Deputy Chief Engineer for Surface Development. Moderating the program is Roseanne Aragon, who is an Emmy Award-winning reporter for an NBC affiliate in Houston. Roseanne serves as KPRC's space reporter and is a self-proclaimed space nerd. Roseanne was on the ground on Florida a year ago covering the launch of the SpaceX Demo 2 mission, the first launch from American soil in over a decade. We will be taking questions after the discussion, so please send your questions through the YouTube comment box. We hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation and the comments from these most remarkable women. Over to you, Roseanne.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks for the great introductions, and thank you to the Asia Society, Selena Joffrey and team for putting together such meaningful programming with the Women's Leadership Series. From experience being on the ground, watching launches, feeling the rumble of the rockets on American soil, to sitting down with space legends and telling their stories, it is truly an honor to be here today. Space is a field, and I'm sure these women will agree with me, a field that is truly inspiring. It's a field that sparks imagination, teaches ordinary people that even the most difficult of visions can turn into reality. The International Space Station, for example, is the world's orbiting laboratory. At one point, that was just an idea. Americans went to the moon with leadership from Houston's Mission Control in 1969. The values, grit, determination, innovation, and leadership. Only now, the leadership is much more diverse. Tonight, through this guided discussion, the goal, like the Asia Society's goals, are to celebrate, listen, and learn these incredible women's stories and the barriers they've broken, what lessons and tokens of advice they have for all of us as well. As a space nerd, I can't wait, and I am thankful for your attention this evening. As Lisa said, please feel free to submit questions. We'll be taking them throughout the program, especially at the end. So sit back and relax. And if you want to, get involved with us. So without further ado, you can also put those questions on the YouTube and Facebook chat box. Now, without further ado, I'm going to kick off this guided discussion. And Jasmine, I want to start with you. It's an honor to have you today. I remember seeing you at the SpaceX Crew 2 News Conference, and you were representing the astronauts, and I had just a moment of pride to see a woman of Asian descent speaking up to represent the astronauts. So I know a little bit about you. You were born in Germany, but grew up in New York before going to MIT. You've done quite a bit. In previous interviews, you've mentioned your family. How has your Asian heritage influenced your work ethic, or values? Tell us about your family.
Well, I think, something that's really important in life is mentors. And for me, first and foremost, my first mentors were my parents. And I think what's really interesting to look back on is when I sit here today and think about this dream that's come true for me, it would not have been possible had my parents not had the courage to leave Iran, and they made that decision to leave all their family, everything they had, to come here to the United States. And first they went to Germany because that's where they were able to get out to first. As you said, that's where my brother and I were born. And then they had the opportunity to come to the United States, and they did. And had they not made that courageous decision, I wouldn't have all these opportunities I have today. And so for me, as you said, my parents have been really inspirational, and my mom especially. Talk about a strong woman role model. My mom, she studied architecture, got her master's in architecture, and wasn't even allowed to use it because right before they graduated was when the revolution happened. But she didn't let that stop her. She came to the States, started working a job in engineering, and just always showed me that with hard work and dedication and confidence, you can really do anything. And my parents have always believed in me. So I think that's been really important.
Thank you. And I think, if there's anything that's a similar thread in these stories, is that we have all come from those who came before us, and we couldn't have been where we are at today without help. With that being said, I want to send the next question to Puja. We know that astronauts are generally seen in the public eye, but your job is particularly one that is built off of learning from many generations, the Apollo generation, etc. So since 2008, you have had one of the most demanding jobs in a great way. For those who are watching that are not familiar, what is a flight director and what made you want to pursue that specific leadership role at NASA?
Yeah, thank you, Roseanne. So I think, what is a flight director? Like Lisa mentioned, a flight director is the person that manages mission control, specifically for human space flight. There are two parts to my job. The first is really planning, and the second is execution. So in terms of planning for the International Space Station specifically, we plan all of the vehicle dockings and undockings, the spacewalks. We have another one coming up this Sunday, as well as all the science and maintenance that we have to do for the International Space Station. So we do all that planning, and then we also have to do the execution as well. So that's actually sitting in mission control and making sure that that activity goes flawlessly. And so there's a lot of planning and then stress the day of to make sure that everything lines up just like we want it to. And if it doesn't, we have an entire team of experts that helps troubleshoot that problem so we can get the goal in mind.
Puja, of all the jobs, yours is the head of the team, the orchestrator. We spoke with Gene Kranz, who says he was the guy who had to make the last call, the decisions. It takes a special kind of person to, really try to learn and take on that role. What about that role was it that resonated with you and your spirit?
Yeah, so I think, what's interesting is that we're really standing on the shoulder of giants, right? Like you said, the Gene Kranzes, the Glenn Lundy's of the world. I mean, we had really great flight directors that we were all able to learn from in our training. And I think really what it is about my personality that it makes me a good fit for this role is that calm under stress. My parents used to always talk about when things would go wrong in our family, when there would be a pot of food that caught on fire on the stove, or we would get in a car accident or something would happen. I would always be the person that was thinking about the logistics. Like, we need to call the police. We need to get that guy's insurance. So while my mom would be, freaking out or intense or whatever it may be, or if that pot was on fire, I'd be like, Mom, you have to get the water poured, And so I was always the logistical person. And so I think this role kind of ended up fitting naturally, even though, to be honest, setting out at NASA, this wasn't always my end all dream job. I was just excited to be at NASA in the first place. And I think after working there for many years, I kind of worked my way up to this role. And it just ended up fitting with the personality that I have.
Yeah, one interesting note, you were a Capcom, and that position is the one that specifically is heard when the public is listening to the transmission between the crew and the astronauts. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And Jasmine's a Capcom as well. We both play that role. That role is actually played traditionally by astronauts, but more recently has also been offered to engineers like myself.
How cool. I'll ask you more about that in a little bit. I do want to get to Grace, though. And speaking about pressure, well, NASA had a huge goal. Congratulations on the Perseverance rover. Wow. I can't believe, we're able to see that kind of feat in our lifetime. Grace, you are quite an asset to NASA's JPL with more than 30 years of experience, more than half of that in flight systems, the other half in mission operations. So you are the perfect person to talk to. What does it mean to be a systems engineer for JPL? What is your typical day like?
Thanks, Roseanne. It's really exciting to be here, by the way. I'm in awe of Puja and Jasmine being here and sharing their experiences, but a little different from what they work, which is humans in space. JPL is more focused on systems, robotic, non-human space exploration, which, if you will, is the first step towards space exploration. We got to figure out how to make everything work in space, and then it's more proven and safer for humans than to explore. And what a systems engineer does is it's about putting all the pieces together. As you can imagine, a rover, for example, has many important pieces, right? There's a computer, there's a structure, there's wheels, there's sensors, and a system engineer's job is about making it all fit together. And kind of like what Puja is saying too, it sort of takes I think everybody brings something to the table, and a systems engineer is about wanting to see the big picture. How does it all fit together? Make sure we haven't forgotten anything. There's an element of intellectual curiosity about, okay, what about this? What about that? And kind of thinking through, all the different ways we want to use our rover and making sure that it can perform. And then having other elements like, suspicion, just a proper paranoia about, okay, what else could go wrong and how do we fix things, and dealing with uncertainty. So there's all these certain characteristics of a systems engineer that helps bring that to the table and making sure we have a successful mission. My typical day probably isn't as cool as Jasmine's, going into space, but I'm in a lot of meetings, frankly, right? Because I'm working with different teams of people. But it's all about, delivering the final flight hardware. So definitely involved in a lot of the testing, whether it's the hardware or the software or the operations. Now, more recently, I'm working in operations and about bringing our team together and simulating a mission and making sure we can drive and operate the mission from the ground. We're not physically with the rover once it's on Mars. And so we have to think through how everything we need to do here on Earth.
Now, we can't help but notice your background there and how fitting that is. For those who are watching and may think, what is that behind her? Could you briefly explain to us, what we're looking at there?
Well, I wanted to share, I'm in the wrong way here. This is a graphic of our rover. It's on Mars. We landed, in fact, this is my landing shirt. Our official landing shirt.
Oh, that's so precious.
Yeah, we all got to be the team virtually on Zooms, I guess. But it's an artist, keep going the wrong way, but it's our rover's on Mars. We landed successfully on February 18th. We spent the first 60, 70 days kind of checking out the rover, stretching its legs, making sure everything survived and was functioning properly. I've been with the mission since the early conceptual phase, but we wanted to make sure everything worked, and then and now it's moving on to its prime surface mission.
So incredible. And if you are watching and you don't know a lot about the Mars Perseverance rover, NASA does a great job of putting all of the basic information online. So if you want to learn more about it, you definitely can. I did want to ask Jasmine a question. We're talking about, the rover. Now I want to talk about something that is just such a big mission in space, and that is the Artemis mission. You are part of the Artemis generation of astronauts. I just think it's incredible to see that we have chosen a group that will start working on these Artemis missions. So, if you're not familiar, the Artemis program, these astronauts that were chosen are charged with focusing on the development and training efforts for early Artemis missions, which plan to send the first women and the next man to the moon by 2024. So, Jasmine, why is this specific mission important to you? And could you be the first women on the moon?
Well, it is possible. I'm part of the Artemis team. There are a lot of reasons it's important to me. I think first and foremost, if you look at the astronauts and you look at the team of people, on the Artemis team, it's a very different looking group than you would see if you looked back to the Apollo days, or even the first 7 astronauts that were selected. And I do think that's really important to represent everyone and the diversity of background, be it work experience or cultural backgrounds, all those things. I think it's really important because I know for me, one of my role models growing up was Sunny Williams, who is still actually in the astronaut office and is incredible. But it's just being able to see someone that looks like you and you can see yourself in that role. I think it's really important. And when we first got selected, I very specifically remember we put on our blue flight suits for the first time and we went out to see our families. And one of my classmates, actually an Indian American, Raja, his daughter was about 2 or 3 at the time. And she saw the woman in our class and she goes, wow, mommies can be astronauts too. And my heart like melted. It was just like such, it hadn't occurred to her before that point. And so I do think it's really important in inspiring future generations. And I do think human exploration and Grace and their team set the stage for us by going forward first with these robotic missions, getting to know the lay of land, getting to know what we're getting ourselves into, and setting ourselves up for that. So I do think it's important for us to continue to explore, and the moon provides us an area to basically figure certain things out before we go on to Mars.
Yeah, essentially, it's like the best gas station you could ever have before going into deep space. I mean, you stop there, you get your gas. Hopefully, you have some, good, ice there that can turn hydrogen, oxygen can turn into rocket fuel. And, ideally, that's what I guess they're thinking, which I think is fascinating, and it's fascinating to watch and report about. But I think you made a really good point, Jasmine, that all that we're talking about right now is, and how space works is, it's just layers. The rover goes to see if it can be done, then it starts to check what the terrain is like, and this is just, as an example of different layers of things that need to be done, and how many years and, of exploration it takes. And that's also very much very similar to who we are as people. And so I wanted to ask you, Puja, about what it means to be such a trailblazer. I mean, you said it yourself, you stand on the shoulders of giants, and you have such a record here. What does it mean to you to be the first female flight director of South Asian descent? And tell us about your background and your family and what the values they've taught you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, on a day-to-day basis, I don't think of myself as the first female flight director of South Asian descent. I go into mission control and I just think of myself as a flight director, just like all the other flight directors that have come before me. Surprisingly enough, we've had over 101 flight directors in NASA's history, and I was the 15th female. And so the ratio is still low. We're absolutely still working on changing that. But the most recent class of flight directors that was just elected, we had 4 new flight directors, and out of the 4, 3 were female. And so that's, times are changing in just that. You can see that in the recent selection. I think my interest in space really came from my father. He's been obsessed with the space industry since he was little. And in India, you kind of take a test similar to the SATs. And depending on your score, you kind of get tunneled into fields. And my dad specifically just did really well on this said test. And then his family asked him to pursue medicine, like many South Asian parents, to be honest, right? And so he ended up doing medicine. He ended up being a great orthopedic surgeon. But because of his love for space, always trickled into our household. We got to watch a lot of space movies. We got to go to NASA all the time. And because of his inspiration is honestly why I'm here today. He just loved it so much that there's no way for me not to love it. And I think those family core values of just curiosity, like Grace was talking about, is just so important. I mean, just to think about the fact that we're in the Artemis mission trying to go back to the moon, which is our closest celestial body, and that is the only place that humans have gone, is just crazy to me, right? I mean, we have the entire Milky Way to explore. And so the fact that we were now going to get to go back to the moon and then go on to Mars after, all of Grace's hard work with perseverance, I'm just super excited to see what's next.
Thank you. And Grace, I'd like to also ask you the same question. If you could, tell our viewers about how your Asian or Asian American identity, translates to who you are in your work.
Yeah, it's actually great to hear, the other stories, because I think mine is not too different, right? My parents immigrated here from China and came here to seek a better life and be able to be successful. My mom also is an engineer. She also graduated in a school where there were very few engineers, and pursued a career that, there weren't just a lot of people in. And she really was a role model. I come from a family of 3 sisters, and a shout out to them, because we all kind of took her lead to move towards something we're interested in. And all 3 of us took different paths, but she kind of gave us the core values of, work hard, believe in yourself, and, don't be afraid to try new things. So I think that is a big part. And I think being a woman in the engineering field also, there's some breakthrough, right? I know that, and I may be guessing here, but I think I have a few more years than some of our other guests here. And so, when I first, and actually I'm a grad of MIT also. So when I started at MIT, the percentage of women were, down at below 30%. I want to say closer to like 25%. And especially in aero-astro engineering where I was, the department was even lower. And to see that grow, now I see, and our daughters just graduated also from STEM disciplines, and just to see that growing, right? MIT now is closer to 50-50, and the women are kind of in every discipline. And so I think we're making a lot of progress. Meetings that I started where I could be the only, not only Asian, but the only female in that room now is I'm in meetings where it's all women. And so to see, all that diversity start to expand, I think has been a real plus. And I think there's still improvement we can do, but I think we've come a long way.
Let's talk about that. Go
just to piggyback on what
Puja.
just to piggyback a little bit on Grace is saying, in the thought of mission control itself, in the 60s, it was only outfitted for men's restrooms, if you really think about it. And now we've gone such a long way where we've obviously outfitted for women's restrooms. And even more recently, I've had to wait in line at the women's restroom because things are actually changing, and now there's lactation rooms and all these other things being added to mission control. And you just know that things are changing for the better in terms of representation.
See, we're on the same wavelength here. I did want to ask you, as a flight director, how does diversity contribute to the product that you're able to deliver at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think the diversity is so important. I mean, diversity of thought in general, the diversity of opinion is so important. Representation, I mean, having the conversations of just different minds brings a better solution, hands down, always. And so the number of different perspectives we can bring to the room, no matter what it is and what type of diversity, will always help give you the best solution possible.
Honestly, I mean, I think our jobs really demand a lot of innovation, right? Ingenuity in terms of new ideas. We're doing things that haven't been done before, and we need the new ideas, and diversity really offers that spectrum and getting all the creative, ideas together, and together come up with much better solutions.
Jasmine, I wanted to ask you a question about, now looking to what we've learned. You had mentioned in a previous interview about the concept of doubt and how, it seems like doubt can be something that is daunting and negative, but you actually see it in a positive way, and you take that doubt and you channel it. Could you kind of, teach those who may be listening, perhaps they are girls who are wanting to get into the STEM field, or they are just looking up to all of the women here on this panel. Could you talk to us and elaborate about your thoughts on doubt?
Sure. Yeah, I think first off, it's important to know that doubt doubting yourself is a very natural feeling. And I know I look up to many other women, and I think surely they never have doubted themselves. And I know deep down that can't be true, right? But I think one thing that's I think is really important, if you're pushing yourself and going to your max potential, you will absolutely fail. And I remember the first time I failed in a significant, meaningful way was, my freshman year of college, my first exam. I got it back. I got a 24 out of 100. And the whole class hadn't failed. I looked around and there were 80s and 90s. Misery loves company. If everyone had failed, I wouldn't have felt so bad. But everyone else, it looked like did great on this exam. And so I really questioned, am I even going to make it to graduation, let alone do that well? And so I think it's very natural to doubt yourself. But what's really important is not to let that overcome you, because I am such a strong believer in the power of the mind. I 100%, if you think you can do something, the chances are you're going to figure out a way to do it. And I think it's it's huge. Someone who doesn't believe they can do it, and it's okay to have moments of doubt, but at the end of the day, you have to say, this is something, or is this something you really want to do, and is it worth the struggle and overcoming the challenges? If it is, find a way to do it. Ask for help. Try different methods, whatever it is. But I think it's really important. But it is good to know that doubt is a very natural human feeling.
I mean, did you ever think you were going to be an astronaut, Jasmine? I know I saw something about NBA, Olympic skier. I mean, you really are so talented. Those are the things you wanted to be, and you settled on astronaut. Did you ever think you were going to be an astronaut?
It's funny, as a kid, I thought I could do anything. You're right. I was like, I would watch people ski.
And I say settled in jest, obviously.
I would watch people ski and I'd be like, yeah, clearly I can do that. So I can be an Olympic skier. And I watched people play basketball. I didn't even think about the fact there wasn't a women's professional league at the time. I didn't even think about that. I was like, yeah, I'm good at basketball. I can be a professional basketball player. It's as you get older that you start to question these things. And as I get older, the dream of becoming an astronaut was something I was like, okay, I never want to shut the door to that. But it's a really, there's a lot of hard work involved, but there's also a lot of luck at the end of the day in getting to this job. I met a ton of other people going through the interviews that would have been just as good as me, if not better. So I think that, I of course doubted it. And when I got the phone call,
yes,
I felt extremely grateful.
Puja, I did want to kind of take this question around the room. The question before, did you ever think you were going to be an astronaut? But really the question of what is the, piece of advice you would give to someone who may be wanting to get into this field, but maybe a little bit intimidated, or, just advice in general for people who are looking this way to figure out what they want to do?
Yeah, I get asked this question quite a bit, and after thinking about it through the years, it's always been interesting to me to see how people that are really into STEM think that their only focus should be in math and science, and that their only grades and their only focus should just be on getting really good grades in math and science and just pursuing that. To me, I think the reason that I got this job was more of the social emotional part of my personality and not my strong math and science skills. While
Really?
Of course I had to have the grades to get in the door. I mean, you have to have the grades to just get in the door in the first place. And I needed to do well in math and science to be technical. But I think being a flight director, if that's what you're asking, like how would I give somebody advice to be a flight director specifically? I think it's really working on those other skills, really working on the soft skills, because those soft skills go so far, especially in an operations role. My main job is to manage mission control, and I have a huge technical team behind me that supports me. But at the end of the day, I need to know how to read people. I need to know if they're nervous. I need to know if they're thinking this is the wrong idea. I need to know if there's a risk involved and that might infect the crew. Are we putting their lives at stake? And so reading people is such a huge part of my role. And so I think that social emotional piece is just very important. And, talking about college, I think one of the main, obviously I did aerospace engineering at the University of Texas, and I learned a lot there. But one of the main things that I learned was actually being the president of my sorority. Like having to manage a group of girls in college.
Really?
Was hard.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hard. And being a part of Greek life at the University of Texas is just huge. We're a big state school, and Greek life was super important. And I think I just learned so much in having to manage, a group of 30 girls through all the things we were going to do that year. That just helped me.
I bet.
Helped me as I continue. And it's just a small thing that I wouldn't have really thought about when I was going to college, because I would have just thought I needed to be in all the STEM clubs, robotics, etc. But I really, looking back, being the president of my sorority was actually very helpful.
Wow. And piggybacking off what you said, and Grace, we'll get to you after this, is about work-life balance. Clearly, you juggled many hats. And I think that, perhaps people who may be watching may think, how does she do that all? And what are some tips that you have to maintain a work-life balance?
Yeah. And I think, after hearing Jasmine and Grace both speak, I mean, we're all mothers here. And I think, that work-life balance is hard. I mean, it's not easy. I think it's a day-by-day thing. And sometimes there's peaks and sometimes there's valleys, and I'm continually at least trying to work on that, daily. But I think one of the things that I try to do, at least from a managerial standpoint, is just to be open and honest and transparent. Like, hey guys, I have to leave this meeting at 5 because I have to pick up my kid from daycare, because otherwise she won't know I exist. Like I've been here all week working really hard, and I need to go pick her up and spend some time with her, because this is a real thing and that's a real part of my life. And she's very important. Same with my husband. I mean, he's very important. And while work is a very important part of my life, it's not the only thing I do. So it's very important that I'm just transparent, and that I tell the people that I work with what I'm doing, so that they feel like they can do the same thing as well. So they can be honest with me when they have to go to the baseball game or whatever have you.
And I'm sure, Grace, there's a lot of discussions that you have to have leading your team. Is there any advice that you have to those watching on leadership, on work-life balance, what have you?
Yeah, well, for me, work-life balance was a top priority. And luckily, JPL has been super supportive of that, right? I think it sounds like Johnson, they have it too, but the lactation station, the leaves, we have daycare very close by. So that's been supportive, but still, it's still a challenge. I think as a parent and a mom, especially with a newborn, right? There's just a lot of balancing emotions and just responsibilities that you have to feel good about. And I think, honestly, when I look back, I did make choices, right? That if I wasn't a mom, I may have gone differently. And at JPL, we have all types of projects, from, ones where we build in-house. And I think you mentioned that in my bio, and to system contract, which is actually more common, especially these days, right? Where we work with Lockheed Martin or another aerospace company to build the spacecraft or operate it. And I consciously chose not to work on those projects when the girls were growing up, right? Because I didn't want to travel every month. I didn't, and that's, it's the balance between wanting to do the right thing as well as doing a good job. And it worked for me. I think it made sense to me. The work I was still, and I think for me, the key criteria, if you will, for the work I've done at JPL is I wanted to work on exciting projects. I want to do new work, something that is new for me, where I'm constantly learning, as well as bringing what I have done to the table, and then working with a great group of people, right? People that we resonate and really get each other. So being able to find a job, the new project that does that was there. So I was lucky to continually, go down that path, which has helped me feel like I balance the work and family life.
Grace, I wanted to ask you about not just the work life and balance, but also the balance with the pandemic and COVID. Considering the nature of your job is very technical, how has the pandemic impacted your work at JPL?
I was heavily on Perseverance. It heavily impacted that, right? Just
I can imagine.
Yeah, last March, we were getting ready for launch. We launched last July. And that's a very hands-on. You're problem solving any little things that come up. Everybody's all hands on deck, and so that was, and the team really came through. Actually, the team I worked on was more about getting ready for the surface operations, and we were trying to get all our final testing done. And so basically, we had to do that virtually in the beginning. And then we slowly, in a very deliberate way, figured out what part of the teams to bring back onto JPL to execute it, how to integrate the rest of the team as if they were there. We have scientists from all around the world, and our management made the decision, let's just bite the bullet. Let's keep them remote for the whole mission. So normally we would bring everybody onto JPL so everybody kind of can work to figure out how to work well together before we disperse and kind of operate from wherever their home organizations are. But we just bit the bullet using the technology now, where we use the government cloud to get all the data distributed. So that was all part of very deliberate and strategic to enable our mission. And it's a challenge. I think that's why we're here, right? It's a hard problem. Let me try to solve it. It's exciting.
You know what? You hit the nail on the head. You're right. It is just another problem. It's a cultural health glitch. We got to recode our what we're doing. Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing with us, Grace. And we know the Perseverance rover eventually will be dropping samples at a location, and ESA is working on a vehicle that will take the samples and bring them back to Earth.
Yes. So I'm actually transitioning onto the Mars Sample Return mission. That's the key objective of Perseverance, is to collect these samples and deposit it so that a future mission can bring it back to Earth, which is, never been done before, super exciting. It's also incredibly challenging, and we're collaborating with other agencies, the European Space Agency, ESA. And it's a very extensive collaboration where the European rovers it's called a fetch rover to go. It's a little version of our rover to go and grab the samples. It'll come back to a lander that NASA is providing. JPL is the lead on that, and we're designing it in-house, where it gets sealed up, tucked inside a little orbit. We call it an OS. And that gets then put into, just like you saw on the Martian, you need something to launch it back up to get back to Earth. So we have a launch system that will bring it up to at least Martian orbit. And then the Europeans are also building a Mars orbiter that will then take that sample and send it back to Earth and land here back in the States. So very exciting.
So cool.
Truly is amazing. Puja, did you want to say something?
No, I was just saying that's really cool. I mean, the amount of handoffs and relay race that sounds like, it's going to be spectacular to watch.
You can't do it alone. It sounds like there's a lot of minds working together there, even through the pandemic. Jasmine, I wanted to ask you about the pandemic too. And, I can only imagine none of us have access to the astronaut training that you do. What does it take to become an astronaut? Can you walk us through the training and perhaps how COVID affected that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the training is, what I love about it is it's so diverse. The things we study, one day I'll be in a biomedical class. The next day, I'm doing robotics and doing Russian, learning geology. I think because you only have a small group of people that launch on any given mission. So you may not have a doctor on board. So you have to have medical training in order to take care of yourself or other crew. If something breaks, you need to have some maintenance skills to be able to fix it. The ISS is an orbiting laboratory, right? So you need some science skills. And so we get to learn such a wide range of things. So I think we all have come in from very different backgrounds and expertise in one area, but it's really being able to become like a jack of all trades and learn a little bit about everything. And then I want to echo what Puja said earlier. I think she gave great advice. Those social and emotional skills are absolutely key. I mean, we're on the International Space Station. They do missions 6 months to a year where you're with the same group of people in a small space at the end of the day, a couple bedroom house basically. And now we're working on missions to send people to the moon and build base camps there and have people have a sustained presence there, and ultimately go on missions to Mars that will be 2.5, 3 years long. And so at the end of the day, I think what she said, she hit the nail right on the head. It is so important in these things, the things that Grace, Puja, all of us are doing in these, tackling these difficult problems. It takes a lot of people, and working with people effectively is key to that. And so I agree that was a huge part. I actually remember in college, I asked one of my professors for a recommendation for an internship, and he told me he wouldn't write it unless I did more after school activities that were aeroastro related, because I played sports. And I said, no, I think it's really important to keep this balance, and I love playing sports. It means a lot to me. And so I do think those skills are key, because obviously having some sort of technical background is also really important. But at the end of the day, working with people is huge.
Thank you. And, speaking of people, I want to take it to the people who are watching. And I have some audience questions to ask. Puja, I wanted to ask one from the audience here. That's a bit less about the job, but more of what's your favorite space-related TV show, movie, or book? And if you can't think of one right now, that's totally okay. We can just raise your hand and we'll go to another person. But if you can, what's your favorite space-related TV show, movie, or book?
Yeah, I mean, I have to hands down say the Apollo 13 movie. I mean, I grew up watching that movie time and time again. And to be honest, I'll tell you a secret. The day before my flight director interview, I watched that movie because it just gives me the feels. I don't know what it is about Ed Harris in that little white jacket, just playing,
he was great.
Yeah, it's just that movie itself just reminds me of the core of what mission control is really about and all the troubleshooting that they had to do. I recently talked about the spacewalks that we have going on. We're installing solar arrays for the International Space Station. And we had our last EVA on Wednesday, and we had some issues. We had some issues with the alignment of getting the solar array connected, on the base plate. And right after that happened, we all got into a room together and we all started spitballing ideas like, what do we think is causing this issue? What did we hear back from the crew? And it just reminds me exactly of that movie and really, honestly, real
Carbon
life.
Dioxide scrubber.
Yeah, that real life of Apollo 13, right? Obviously, I wasn't there for the real Apollo 13, but that movie just gives me the feels. So
let's get into a room and figure out how do we put a square and make it fit into a circle.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we did. That's exactly what we did this week on Wednesday when we had an issue. And so it's just the core of mission control.
Another question. This one is specifically for Jasmine. Can you share an exciting, scary, or challenging experience during training?
Absolutely. So everyone has different things they struggle with. And for me, the training in the neutral buoyancy lab, so, the huge pool with life-size mock-up of the International Space Station where we train in the suit doing spacewalks. And I remember being so excited to get in the spacesuit for the first time. It was such a surreal feeling. And I had watched astronauts do spacewalks before and they made it look fairly easy. So I got in there and I remember it being so incredibly hard. And again, it was one of those moments of doubt where I go, I don't know. I mean, I started out and I was just very clumsy. I was exhausted to the point where I, was barely thinking straight. And I was like, I just don't know if I can do this and figure it out. And I just didn't, you watch them in their spacesuit and you think, okay, they're just moving. It's like moving in clothes, but it is like your own little spacecraft, and you really have to learn to move with it and work with it because it only rotates in certain directions and the joints only move a certain way. So if you don't have the suit oriented the right way, you're just going to be fighting it the whole time. And every time you do this, right, we've got the vacuum of space, so we need to pressurize the suit to keep us alive. And so every time you do this, it's like you're squeezing one of those grip machines or whatever, and it's really exhausting on the forearms. And the gloves are a bit clumsy. So that to me, one was very eye-opening. I had watched so many spacewalks and never realized how difficult it truly is. But for me in the training, that was definitely the hardest part. And I luckily had a lot of mentors, Tracy Caldwell Dyson. I kind of chose her as one of my mentors, and she spent hours watching videos of me in the neutral buoyancy lab and telling me things I could change. And she had a schedule that was plenty busy to be taking out time to doing that. So I was extremely appreciative of her, and the divers would give me tips, the TCs and everyone who, contributed to making me better at that and finally getting to where I needed to be.
And that's the Johnson Space Center's way of simulating weightlessness. Is that right? Someone had.
Yes. Unfortunately, we can't just turn off gravity, but we do our best.
Grace, did you have a challenging moment that kind of, got your heart pumping that you wanted to share with everybody?
Yeah, well, actually, just let me build on what Jasmine was saying. I just want to emphasize that I know for me too, I resonate with the idea that, it's really a community, and Puja said this too, right? It's about us working together. And when I first started there, I didn't know. I learned what we learned in college, but not about the real application to what it takes to design or help solve a real problem that's in front of us. And so there's so much mentoring and support that comes across when I first started there, and I could just always, and yeah, people are busy, right? Everybody has their own work, but it's such a collaborative environment where I could say, hey, can I meet with you for an hour? Can you help explain this problem? Why do we want to do it this way? And it's always been that's been such a great way to learn and become, more expert in an area, is just, people helping and taking the time to help you grow. So that said, right, there's always these scary moments. I think for me, maybe the one that fits is just for me, since I'm mostly in the design and development, the operation side, which is, I think, more of the world that the rest of you live in. It's a moment of truth, right? And so even though we've done all the testing, all the analysis, and all the debates about what we needed to be able to do, the moment of truth of when EDL is the entry, descent, and landing. When landing's happened, that 7 minutes of terror you watched our landing. It's about how everything needs to work, and you just don't know. You don't think you can do anything more. We've done everything we can, but it's always that, hold your breath and see if everything works, and it all has to click off. We have no way of communicating with it or tell it to try something different. It has to all work, and it's a very complex sequence of events with sensors that trigger off each of the next events. And so that's my, I guess, sort of similar analogy. And I think my self-doubt moments aren't as dramatic as the ones that the other folks could do, but that's just always a part of work, right? That there are hard problems. I don't know how I'm going to solve it. I don't know how I'm going to meet this deadline. But then it's about working together as a team, pulling the people that you trust, and together working to come up with an answer.
Puja, did you have something to say? I can only imagine in your specific position, moments where you're like, oh my goodness, did all the plans go right? Did all the checklists check off right?
It's almost every day, to be honest, in mission control, right? We're doing highly dynamic
probably
things.
Cool as ice.
No, but we're doing highly dynamic things. And when my head hits the pillow the night before something major like the EVA, like I just mentioned, or vehicle docking, a reboost, whatever's going on in the space station, I am going through that checklist in my mind. Like, did I get everything right? Did I do everything that I was supposed to do? Did I coordinate enough? Does everybody know where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to be doing, when? And I think all of us, just like Jasmine was talking about earlier, all of us have a sense of imposter syndrome or self-doubt, or, did I do everything correctly? But at the end of the day, all you can really do, kind of like Grace was saying, is do your best, right? At the end of the day, I know that no matter what happens on space station, all I can do is give it my all. And I think that's my motto going into mission control, right? I'm in charge of these 7 astronauts. Every day I step into that room and anything could happen. Most recently we've had a false emergency happen where it was all three of our emergencies hit the board at the same time. And I was the flight director on console for that. And I had to, in a cool collective manner, make sure that we were all okay and the astronauts were okay in the end. But when that happens, it's really that roller coaster of emotions of really working through the problem at hand. So.
Thank you, Puja. We do have a few viewer questions, and Jasmine, the guitars in the background, they're a hot topic. Can you play them all? Is this an interest you have? Are you interested in music?
I do love music, and by looking at the guitars, I probably look like I'm a lot better than I am. I'd say I'm probably a mediocre player at best. There's also a drum set behind me and a piano off to the side as well. So I like to play around a bit. It's been a bit less since my daughters have been born, but sometimes I do play the guitar for them as well.
Also, another question for you, Jasmine, is what career advice would you give to someone hoping to become an astronaut? I'm in undergrad for Aero and considering OCS to become a pilot with a lifelong goal of becoming an astronaut.
All right. Well, so first up, I want to second what Puja said earlier about, I think it's really important to, at MIT, I think one of the things that I learned in addition to overcoming failure and bouncing back from that, MIT has a really collaborative environment. So there are some top schools that are very competitive and cutthroat. At MIT, people really work together, even going through. And it was never a like push someone else down to get ahead kind of mentality. And so I think that's really important, is as you go through, recognize when you need help and ask someone for it, and also recognize when you can bring someone up with you and help them, because I guarantee you it will come back to you tenfold. And another thing that I think is really important is what Puja said about the social and emotional skills are critical to being an astronaut. And then lastly is, don't do something just because you think it will get you to, as part of a checklist to become an astronaut. As I said, at the end of the day, if you ask anyone in the office, the astronaut office, they feel incredibly lucky to be here. There's no checklist that you can say, if you do all these things, you will become an astronaut. There are things you can do to guarantee you probably won't become an astronaut, so don't do those things, but pursue what you love. And if for you that path is going to the military and OCS and aviation, absolutely. If that's what you feel strongly about, do it. For me, there was this critical moment in flight school where I had joined the Marine Corps thinking I wanted to fly jets, but then we flew helicopters in the basic school. We got some flights in helicopters, and I really liked the mission of helicopters and specifically the Cobra, but I thought you had to be a jet pilot to become an astronaut. And so I was really torn. And then I watched Sunny Williams launch on STS-116. And so I was reading the bios of the crew, and she was a Navy helicopter pilot. And that's when I was like, I'm going for it. Like, this is what I really want to do. I can guarantee you, if I become a jet pilot, I probably wouldn't be here, because I wouldn't have been as passionate about it. I wouldn't have been as successful at it. And I wouldn't have kind of risen to the top of my field. So do things you love. And if you're passionate about them, you will likely be very successful, and that will help you.
Thank you so much. And, we have 3 minutes left in the program. So I just wanted to have Grace and Puja just, say a sentence or two about their advice as well to the future generation of space explorers, just a few words to have them, ruminate on as they leave this program. So if we wanted to start with Puja and then Grace right after her. Again, we have a couple minutes.
Sure. I'll just quickly say that I think, I got to where I am is exactly what Jasmine said, because I am doing what I love. I really rose in this field because I was doing what I love day in and day out. And because I love that, I was able to show a good work product. And so I really do recommend that you find a field that you just love. And if you don't, pivot again, and until you find that field that you just absolutely want to do day in and day out.
Yeah, same, right? I think it's really important to figure out what you feel passionate about, work hard, put your energy, because I think then it shows, right? That this is what you love and you really enjoy it, and you will do whatever it takes to get it right. And just to grow and not be afraid. Don't worry about a checklist. I think I totally resonate with that. People think, oh, well, what's your goal in life? I don't know. I want to do what I love doing. And I will continue to do that until I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So I follow your passion.
Really wise words. Thank you so much for your incredible stories and the way that you are impacting everyone who is watching tonight. To the viewers, we hope you enjoyed the program. Asia Society Texas Center offers over 150 public programs each year featuring artists, culture, education, business, policy, and current events. You can learn more about upcoming programs and webcasts through the Asia Society website. And with that, thank you all so much for your time. I enjoyed our conversation, and I know our viewers did too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.